Welcome to the Injury Desk podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Shilstone, and I am here with my father, Mackie Shilstone, and we're going to be talking about NFL injuries and how they affect your fantasy football team. A quick breakdown of injuries that we had this week. There are 5 quarterbacks that are injured. Brock Purdy sat out in week 2. Mac Jones did work and handled the Saints very well. So he's a great fantasy waiver pickup for you. Then we have Jaden Reed, the Packers wide receiver, went out with a broken collarbone. Aaron Jones, the Minnesota running back, is out with a hamstring injury. Austin Eckler, Commanders running back, has a torn Achilles and he will be out. And then when it comes to quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels has a knee sprain. He most likely won't play, but he's day to day. JJ McCarthy, already confirmed he will not play. He has a high ankle sprain, and it's the same exact leg that he had the meniscus tear. Then our last is Joe Burrow, who has a grade 3 turf toe injury and is out. He is already placed on IR, so you can go ahead and take him out of your lineups. And then lastly, Justin Fields went out with a concussion. Now, we're also going to talk about Taliese Fuaga, the Saints starting right tackle, who's dealing with Patellar tendonitis, and how that's going to affect quarterback play from Spencer Rattler. I first want to start with Joe Burrow and Brock Purdy. Both of them are dealing with turf toe. Brock Purdy's was it's either assumed to be a grade 1 or 2 because the team did not state it was a grade 3. Joe Burrow is a grade 3 tear. So why don't you explain for our audience what the difference is between a grade 1, 2, and 3 turf toe injury?
Well, sure, Spencer. The turf toe sounds like it's not much, but it can be one of the most prolonged, potentially debilitating injuries an athlete can face, especially in the NFL. A turf toe, grade 1, means that the ligaments, and let me use you see my finger here? So this is the nail of the toe, and this would be the base where it connects to the foot. So if I take my toe here, this is called extension, and this is called flexion. So what happens in the situation of a grade 1? I hyperextend it, I overstretch it, causing in the joint inflammation. That's an injury that it takes potentially 1 to 2 games to be out of. Right now, most of the players come back within the week when they are either taped up or there is a compression plate, a firm plate under the toe to prevent it from going back into that situation. So it gives it a base of support. Later on, the player would probably graduate to a custom orthotic. Now, the important thing to recognize in grade 1 is that this joint is critical. It does this and this. When I'm the quarterback on the right foot, I've dropped back, whether it be for a handoff or a pitch out or whether it be a pass, I drop back. And the minute I get to where I'm going, I push down. That's called dorsiflexion. This is plantar flexion, okay? Like the ankle. So like that. Well, I'm losing this and I'm being restricted. So my push off is not going to be what it was before I was injured. Grade 2, my joint, I've hyperextended it and I've partially torn some of the tendons. That is roughly 3 to 6 weeks, so a week being a game. That's maybe 3 to 6 games. These are statistical averages in the NFL. A grade 3 is what you talk about with Joe Burrow, where he gets into a hyperextension and he has a complete tear. That's going to require roughly 8 to 12 weeks after surgery, and the physical therapist would be charged in all of the cases to get mobility, stability, and strength. Mobility, stability, and strength. Now, the interesting point when you look at the statistics in the NFL, I'm looking at statistics back to 2023 on this specific injury. What you come to find is on the players that sustained a grade 1, that being overstretching, grade 2, partial tear, roughly the number of down days is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5, 3.2 games. But 87% of the players come back to a form by the next season of equal to what it was before the injury. In a grade 3 tear, where you rupture, complete tear, the tendons around in the joint requiring surgery, only 27% of those people who get this injury come back to their performance before the injury. Remember, before the injury, but grade 1 and 2 to what they were maybe the previous season where they have come back and they can continue to perform. The moral of the story is this is not anything you take lightly. It affects your acceleration and deacceleration. That is why offensive and defensive linemen, running backs, and receivers have the highest incidence of these turf toes in the National Football League. Keep in mind, the turf toe is because typically the cleat non-contact, the cleat stays firm in the turf, the player moves and extends up, and it was non-contact. But you also can get it in situations where your foot is planted and you just get whacked and the foot is just forced into the situation. So either way, you can get a serious injury with it.
And that's really what happened to Joe Burrow. He was tackled by the foot and had a defensive lineman basically bring his foot very much into that pressure point. So originally it was looked at as an Achilles risk, but when it was turf toe, it's seen rather than being at the ankle point, it's at the toe point. Another thing to look at when you're looking at Brock Purdy about him coming back, being the fact that it was a lower grade, you would expect him to come back, but it is a lingering issue. Brock Purdy's not going to have as much power behind his throws because about 65% comes from the legs, comes from the hips and the rotation, where he's going to have to use the rest of it coming from his shoulder. The problem with Brock Purdy is he also has a shoulder injury. So when you watch him come back, is he going to have the ability to throw the deep ball, and not a deep ball that's going to sail over, but a more line drive type of throw? That's going to give you that idea if he's back or not. I want to have a quick question for you, though, when it comes to the movement of the hips for the quarterback, because you trained Peyton Manning when he won the Super Bowl with the Broncos. What was one of the
The
ways that you
second
did
Super
it?
Bowl. The second Super Bowl.
The second Super Bowl, yes, when he was with the Broncos, not the Colts. Um, the what was the what did you have him be training on? It's the 4x4 beam, right?
Well, what Spencer's referring to is I recognized a long time ago that what Spencer does, which is called integrative performance management or integrative performance, you integrate a lot of disciplines together. You have to be cognizant of what the physical therapist is doing, athletic trainer, the sports psychologist. You're having to do it all. One of the common denominators in my 14 years with Serena Williams, or whether it be the last year for Peyton Manning, or Bernard Hopkins, Roy Jones Jr., Riddick Bowe, Michael Spinks, Morton Anderson, kickers, and thousands
I
of
mean, this
others.
list can go on if you
Yeah,
just
well,
keep
the
naming
point
names.
is, every one of them had to stabilize and mobilize. So they had to stabilize on one part of the body or one muscle side, and they had to mobilize something else. It doesn't get any simpler than that, and it doesn't get any more complex than that. I asked Peyton Manning to do what I did with Serena Williams and 26 NFL kickers that I had who set records. I went to Lowe's or Home Depot. You see these beams that are 4x4x6, so it's 4 inches high, 4 inches wide, 6 feet long. I'd cut them in half. And physical therapists are going to put you on a BOSU or a stabilizer. They're going to put you in situations where you're forcing the proprioception of the ankle and the brain working together, especially in high ankle sprain. But something like this with a turf toe, because they've got to bring back stability, and they're going to get you to stabilize. Well, in the world of sports, you've got to do it in microseconds. So I had to come up with something that was between what the therapist might do and what they might do on the field to get them in the no man's land, the transition from injury to the field. That's where science has missed the boat for years. So what did I
Hmm.
do? I put them on a balance beam and had them execute their throwing. I had Peyton Manning in a long corridor, and he would take the snap. He'd go back. And remember, if he didn't go back and he's only moving back 3 feet because I cut the beam down in
Because the board's
size.
only that long.
Well, it's about that long. So I wanted him to go back and then release. If he stood up when he released, he'd fall off. That means the ball fell away from the target. And I had to do this because I needed to teach him you're no longer going to throw with your shoulder, you're going to throw with your hips. The common denominator, when I would ask hundreds of players, I would say, what's your scapular stabilization rotator cuff program? If you throw forward, if you hit forward, if you serve forward, you've got to train in reverse. And
Mhm.
so I put him in a situation where I forced him to stabilize immediately because in the game, time is the only thing you can control. You can't control the defense, but you can control what you can do in the time you're given. Quarterback, 3 seconds to get the ball off. When I first started, 5 seconds. Now it's 3 seconds. Everybody's gotten better. So the moral of what you're talking about is whether it's a turf toe or whether it's the scapulas in the shoulders, you're going to need to stabilize to mobilize.
And so that's like a key point. If you're somebody that's a former athlete, you're still in sports, and you don't understand how you can come back from an injury, that's where MaxWell Nutrition Unlimited is a great tool for you. MaxWell Nutrition Unlimited is an app that I put together that features over 5 different programs ranging from weight management to functional performance, as well as return to sport. And what Mackie's talking about with the scapular stabilization program is one of the key programs in that app. You're also able to track your nutrition, follow along video workouts, and then even communicate with the coach if you have questions. Right now, it's $250 for life. We're doing that for our founding members. After that, it's only going to be that for a year or it's going to have a monthly subscription rate. So sign up for Maxwell Nutrition Unlimited and you will also receive 20% off of all products on the Maxwell Nutrition website. So go to maxwellnutrition.com to learn more about that. So I want to continue on and we're going to talk about Justin Fields, the quarterback for the Jets. Now, he took a hit from Joey Bosa and fell backwards. And when he fell backwards, he hit the back of his head. Now, that led him to have to go to the tent, and he was not allowed to come back to the game because he was deemed to have a concussion. He's now going to go through the concussion protocol. You and I have a lot of experience working with athletes that go through this. My experience working with the military, and then your experience working with boxers. So, what's the current status of where the NFL is at with how they handle concussions? And is there anything important to know about the fact that he hit the back of his head versus if he hit the front?
My real experience with concussions, although in boxing I wrote a chapter for Barry Jordan's book, The Medical Aspects of Boxing, and I wrote a chapter for the Ringside Safety and Procedures from the Nevada State Boxing Commission. So, yes, you are correct. But for 21 years, I was the official lifestyle management program for Major League umpires set up by a friend and colleague, Mark Latan, who was the head trainer for the San Francisco Giants. And I worked as a performance nutrition and conditioning consultant for the San Francisco Giants for 10 years. The Major League Baseball's umpires had one of the most sophisticated concussion management programs that I'd seen in sports. They were way ahead of the NFL at the time. The point was umpires that had sustained a concussion would come into I was affiliated at the time of 7 years with one major hospital group, and then for 6 years with another. And the umpires would come in to get reinstated because we had a AAA team, the New Orleans Zephyrs at the time, and the umpire could come back in and go and work the AAA games, and somebody from Major League Baseball would come down and watch. They'd be going through my program, and we would see what would happen when the umpire would get hit. There was a sophisticated program, vestibular, in order to bring them back all the way to going back on the field. The difference is the umpire that was getting hurt by the baseball bat hitting him in the head when the player went back to cock the bat, or when the catcher missed the ball and hit the umpire at someplace in the head, even with the mask. But what you're talking about in the NFL really changed after the NFL was exposed to a major lawsuit a number of years ago, where they had to pay millions of dollars to players that had sustained injuries, and it was a settlement. Right now, the NFL has a program developed by the NFL committee, their medical committee, for the head, the neck, and the spine, and then in conjunction with the NFL Players Association. So that program was put in place. It starts out where there are people in the press box that are spotters trained to do this. On the sidelines, you've got some independent neurological consultants not affiliated with the teams that will help to make a decision, takes the pressure off the attending or the team doctor who's on the road with the team. They pull the player out, they take them in the tent, and a diagnosis or a decision is made as to whether they can go back. That's on the physicians there. And so it's done quite well. Once they're taken out and it's determined that they need to be put into the NFL concussion management program, there are 5 tiers. The first tier is rest, the rest in the form of physical work and cognitive,
Mhm.
because you got to understand the brain is the biggest user of energy, glucose at rest, and the muscles are the biggest user of glucose at the work. Well, the brain has to function off this. So the idea is studying the playbook or studying intense training. I'm going to work on my mind while I'm recovering is actually putting the brain under stress. We learned that watching kids in high school who were on the concussion management protocol doing homework, and it took them longer to recover. So moving forward, phase 2 of the NFL program is light aerobic exercise. Again, you cannot pass from number one position, rest, to light the aerobic exercise without being cleared. So there's a built-in protection. This light aerobic exercise is not high intensity. It's at lower heart rates.
Mhm.
So you go ahead, you clear that, you move into number 3. Tier 3 of the NFL concussion management program calls for sports specific work or game specific, but no contact. It may be the quarterback is throwing, receiver might be catching, but it is let's just call it a skill specific. Again, they're evaluated that after that, and they have to make sure that they do not regress. If they regress, they've got to go back 1 tier and start the previous tier so that there are no symptoms. Number 4 on the hit parade, to use that word facetiously, is
Mhm.
I'm going to be in non-contact practice. Again, they've got to clear that. And then number 5, they're cleared for
Cleared for contact. Now, something to keep in mind for Justin Fields is when he was in high school, he was diagnosed with epilepsy. And that does mean that when he has a concussion, he has a greater risk. And so when you're looking at the average for a NFL player to come back from a concussion is 6 to 7 days. So usually it's like, are they going to make that game the next week or are they going to come back in the week after that? With the fact that Justin Fields was diagnosed in high school with epilepsy, it's something that you really should take into mind that the team's going to probably hold him off a little bit longer unless he's absolutely needed and they're really pressing for it.
let me add something to this, because I think before you move forward, I think the audience needs to understand what is epilepsy.
Hmm.
And epilepsy is diagnosed particularly by a neurologist, and it is where the individual sustains some epileptic seizures. And
Yes.
there is a criteria for meeting the diagnoses of epilepsy, and that's determined by the attending physician. But there is an established criteria. So you have to understand, and I can only make the assumption that in Mr. Field's case, and since this was done at a young age, his high school attending physician for his whatever teams he played, specifically contact, and his college and the pro doctors are all aware of this, because one of the criteria of the NFL protocol is past medical history. But I've always wondered this, Spencer. Sometimes I make an allusion to, I worked with James Cameron, the great movie director, for the most recent Terminator movie on one of the lead actors. And he called me, and James Cameron, uh,
He actually called me.
yeah, he called you.
Back
Yeah, that's right.
I'm the
But
one
he's
that
looking for
picked
me.
up and answered, and then I went ahead and called you, and I said, "You need to know who he is. He was
Well,
Terminator."
he did the time. He produced the movie Titanic, Avatar,
Yes.
and all the Terminators. I helped 2019 Terminator 3, Dark Fate. But
I think that was
the
4 or
important point
5.
is he came within 11 feet going down to look at the Titanic of the world record, 11 feet. And we all know what happened, unfortunately, to that submarine that went down with that group and
And I
imploded.
told you not to bring that up on the call because he had no idea that he didn't get it.
Yeah, well, anyway, the point is the Titanic was not sunk by the iceberg above the water, below the water. And
Mhm.
that's my point with the concussion. You say that X player sustained 2 NFL concussions this season, but how many did he have in biddy ball, high school, college? And keep something in mind. There's something called a secondary concussion um, um, situation. If a player, an athlete, sustains a concussion, and I believe the time period to I'm trying to be as accurate as I can. I believe it is within 10 days of the original concussion. There is some
Mhm.
serious
There's
ramifications to
risk.
that. So that is why this NFL protocol is critical. But unfortunately, despite the helmets and everything that's being done, you can't necessarily stop that concussion. Now, Spencer, you deal with the military. You deal with explosions. What do you see in these military people, and what's the solution?
So when the work that I do with the military is really about helping the service members have a longer career. And one of the things that they deal with is that they lose service members to TBIs. Now, what a TBI is that stands for traumatic brain injury. Now, they deal with two different types. There is MTBIs, which are mild traumatic brain injuries, and then there's repetitive subconcussive injuries. And those two are the real ones. If you think about it, if you're shooting a bunch of rounds off using a heavy machine gun, each one of those bullets creates a small concussive blast. Those will go through your eye protective and ear protection, and they add up. So if you think about it in a way, if I was to go onto my arm and just tap over, 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 just nonstop for an hour, I'm not going to feel any pain, but the next day I'm going to have a bruise. And that's what that is. It's the additional amount. It's just the repetitiveness that they deal with. And so what we've put together, and it started off with your hospital program, and since you retired, me working with them, we try to build up their internal armor. Now, how do you build up an internal armor for the body? We want to look at inflammation, and we want to look at something called DHA. Uh, which is a form of omega-3s. It's found in marine life, algae, and fish, and 8% of your brain is made up of DHA. Actually, ECU football, they did a study, let's see, I wanna
Texas
say
Christian University.
yes. So they did a study back in 2021. And what that study was is that they took all their players and they broke them up into two groups. The control group, we got the placebo, and then the group that was tested on. And what they found was not only were they taking DHA, but they were taking anywhere from 2,000 to 6,000 milligrams a day. Now, how do they decide who gets what? It's not just weight, but what the position was. So the guys in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, running backs, those guys received a higher dose of DHA, while the skilled position players, the quarterbacks, the defensive backs, safeties, and wide receivers, they were getting anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000. They were able to see, and they started this during the preseason during summer work, and then they went on for the full season and postseason. They were able to see that the participants that were actually given the DHA had less neurofilament light, which is a indicator that you use during an MRI. That's an indicator of trauma to the brain. Ironically, it's also known as NFL. They were able to see that they had less markers of neurofilament light in the people that were taking DHA versus the ones that weren't. So they were able to see that not only were they protecting their brain, but they were doing a better job of recovering the brain compared to the others. And to figure out how to know how much DHA you should be doing, they used the omega-3 index test, which you can get online. And the omega-3 index test will tell you how much omega-3 that you're going to need. It gives you a little calculator based off your results. Now, ideally, you want to be anywhere from 8 to 12%. But the thing about omega-3s are they're an anti-inflammatory. So when I do my work with my military guys, we want to watch for that. We want to make sure that we're not going over that 12% because then there could be a bleed risk. And that's one thing we don't want them to be. Now, the test also gives you the ability to understand your omega 3 to 6 ratio. Omega 6 is another fatty acid that is essential, just like omega 3, meaning our body does not produce it itself. We instead have to get it through our diets. Now, omega 3s we get from things like fish, eggs, and things like olive oil and chia seeds, but they're not all created equal. Olive oil, chia seeds, flax, all plant based omega 3s are ALA, and ALA has to turn into EPA and turn into DHA. So if you want to get that DHA, the best way to do it is to get it through your diet with fish or supplement when you don't get it. I don't eat enough fish in my diet, so I make sure that I take an omega 3 supplement. And when I took my test, originally I was about 4.5%. Taking 3,000 milligrams a day, 6 months later, I was at 9%. So that gives you an understanding of the time frame it takes to get that up. And that's the real important thing is what can you do to stop those type of injuries? It's not just rehab or prehab. Nutrition plays a critical role in your ability to recover the body, and making sure you get the right nutrition. You're really going to only know if you go do the lab work. And that's going to be a very important thing about that.
One thing you should consider, and it's true in your military work in this case, the men you are dealing with that go on targets, and the people that we're talking about, let's say now in the NFL, the only difference is your group, losing's not an option. This group,
Of course.
you can lose and you still get paid and come home. Your side may come home in a body bag. Just remember one thing: action is greater than reaction, which is why people in the group that Spencer's talking about major in surprise, speed, and violent action, because action is always going to be quicker than reaction. But what Spencer's talking about is a way to react when you have no choice but to react. If you
Hmm.
don't react, you're in a tough situation. He's talking about in the neurocognitive function. Right now, dementia is a big word in our world today. Dementia, cognitive decline, and Alzheimer's is the number one. But in the NFL, with the trauma, and over on his side with the military, the biggest issue is CTE. So chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And that is something, for the most part, they can see the symptoms now, but they have to diagnose it when you're dead. So let's hope we can do something to help the military and the players to not have to find out the problem after they're dead, because then there's no more reaction then.
No. So when you're looking at quarterbacks right now, there's 5 quarterbacks that are gonna be out for for week 3. So people that you could be looking on over at the waiver wire is Daniel Jones. Mac Jones played very well against the Saints, and in a Kyle Shanahan system, I would think that they're gonna give Brock Purdy more time because keep in mind, it's the turf toe in combination with the shoulder injury that's going to prevent him from playing his best. Now, I just want to move on to our last player before we head off. And that's going to be the Saints starting right tackle, Taliese Fuaga, who's dealing with an inflamed patellar tendon or patellar tendonitis. And that's going to be in his right leg. And keeping in mind, he is a right tackle. So the right leg is the leg that he's going to push off more. It's that outside leg. Now, Fuaga is listed as 324 pounds. So what I want to ask for the audience is, what is his weight due to his knee?
Well, you're going to figure that when he pushes off, if he's doing repetitive pushing, and of course, what's the average time of an NFL play? It's about 4.5, 5 seconds. A quarterback has to get the ball off some way in less than 3 seconds now in the current age. So he's not out there like a repetitive distance runner or whatever. He's also, as you said, 320 pounds. He's 6'6". Got to be carrying a significant amount of visceral fat. I can tell you in my programs, we use DEXA scans. It is the gold standard for body composition, bone, fat, skeletal muscle in a 4-compartment mix. The idea is and I wrote a book, I've written 7 books on wellness, but the one I'm talking about is Lose Your Love Handles. For a man to have a 40-inch waist and carry it into his 4th decade, into the ages of 40, he has a significant risk to type 2 diabetes. A woman, 35 inches or higher, measured at the belly button. You have 3 types of, well, predominantly 3 types of fat. subcutaneous, that's under the skin. You
Mhm.
have intramuscular, that's in, like you see a steak and you cook off the intermuscular fat. You have visceral abdominal fat that is in the gut area behind when the abdominal wall. And then the last one, which very rarely gets talked about, is ectopic, ECTOPIC fat. That's the fat that if your heart is here, the fatty is around it. I'm not talking about necessarily invading it. That's intramuscular. The heart is a muscle. This is around it. So this fat in the visceral abdominal area sends out inflammation signals. So you got to figure this 324-pound man is viscerally, abdominally fat. He may be class 1 obese, but you don't think about that in the NFL. And I've had many, many NFL O&D linemen. I've had multiple segments on HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumble. And at one point, after I had seen so many, looking at their lab studies. And remember, the physical given to the players is not a physical you want to live your life by. It's just a
Mhm.
physical to be with a team for a short period of time and move on. So the idea is already a man like that carrying excess visceral fat has already got an inflammatory cascade. In other words, anything, whether it be shoulder, elbows, knee, whatever, you get it, that inflammation is going to be magnified. Now, what Spencer called this is inflammation of the patella tendon. Well, that can be called a couple of things. Patella tendonitis. The patella is the kneecap on top that glides. The knee is a closed compartment, and so it's sitting on top. When you get this irregular wearing underneath the kneecap, it's called patellachondromalacia. Nondescript pain around the patella is called patellar arthralgia. And going from an acute tendonitis to a chronic is called tendinopathy. So you've got a couple of things to understand on that. Number one of the biggest causes of this is tight hamstrings because it puts too much pressure on the tendon because the knee doesn't get out extended. It's always in flexion. So it's putting pressure here. The other thing on the side of the knee is called the VMO, the vastus medialis oblique. The VMO can atrophy, and that's going to cause the patella to shift. And it's also going to make the knee unstable in internal motion.
Mm.
So that also could be tied to down the line, risk to ACL tear. And the idea is if you look at the anatomical, here's my pelvis. If I tilt forward, remember the pelvis is part of a pulley and lever system, the hips, the quads, the hamstrings. So I tilt forward, the hamstrings insert up at the insertion at the butt called the ischial tuberosity, and it takes the hamstring and tightens it. So in other
Yeah.
words, my hamstrings got flexible, all of a sudden it's tightened.
So what you're describing right now is an anterior pelvic tilt, which is actually something that's common with people that sit at a desk for a very long time, as well as these athletes like an offensive lineman. One of the things that it makes it look like you have a bigger butt because your hips are hiked up in the back. And that's why an issue like that could lead to the hamstring stretching. A lot of people would say, you need to stretch out your hamstrings more, stretch out your hamstrings. That's not the case. It would actually be more required to strengthen them and strengthen and stabilize the pelvis. Because when you stabilize the pelvis, you can mobilize the hamstring and the hips.
I think the key point for your people that do fantasy, maybe not, I don't know about the gambling, although depending on, I had quite a few right tackles in the NFL, and for that quarterback, or left tackles, I should say, and right tackles, but for that right-handed quarterback going back, I had all pro tackles I've worked with, such as Lomas Brown, and he's protecting the quarterback's backside. That means the quarterback, if Lomas or someone like Lomas missed the block, then all of a sudden that quarterback's being hit from the back. That's going to drive him in the ground. He could separate his shoulder, concussion. So that's why typically he's the highest paid off, other than the center offensive
Yeah.
lineman. But I will tell you that this is an injury that if it is chronic, the physical therapists, athletic trainers will manage this. They can do kinesiotaping. They can do all the icing. They can do iontophoresis. They can do They can do laser treatment. They can do dry needling. There's just an array of weapons in the toolbox, but the key element is that they'll do pain management. So how much pain can this lineman take? They'll brace him. They could be giving him, and again, this is up to the team doc, a Toradol anti-inflammatory injection. They could be using cortisone. That's up to the doctors. They could be using a topical cortisone like Voltaren and rubbing it on because the Voltaren can penetrate. There's a host of things all done under medical supervision. And so, yes, this is a guy that can continue on, but remember, you let that patella tendon just stay inflamed. You wear under the kneecap, but you also put the patella tendon at risk for rupture. So that's where all the medical management comes in. Thank goodness the NFL has the NFL teams have some great staff that take care of this.
Mhm. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is the Saints, they lost Ryan Ramczyk, who was their starting right tackle after last year, and he had the same thing for years. It was his right knee always being an issue, and he retired because of it. And it's something that offensive linemen are always going to deal with because they're always getting low, they're squatted in that position. Now, what you want to look at when it comes to your fantasy football output is Taliese Fuaga was actually not doing as well during the passing game as he did during the running game. So when you see that, that means Spencer Rattler's not going to have as much time to throw a deep ball. That's going to negatively affect Rashid Shaheed. Now, he did have a good game. He did have a touchdown against the 49ers, but I would expect Jawan Johnson to be the one that's going to continue to get the greater amount of targets at tight end for the Saints. So if you're looking for a fantasy person to pick up, Jawan Johnson is absolutely somebody for you to go get. And hopefully, Fuaga can manage this pain and play well, so that way Alvin Kamara can also get some more run in and get that run game going. That's the week 2 recap of all the injuries that are relevant in the NFL for your fantasy team. Stick tuned for next week when we recap week 3. And I'm Spencer, and it's my father Mackie, and this was the Injury Desk Podcast.
See you next time.